In today's video, we're going to be going through the list of all of my favorite non-healthcare related podcasts. If you're new here, welcome. I'm Liz. I'm a family nurse practitioner and make videos on those things, nursing things, mom things, life things. If you follow me on here or over on Instagram, you know I talk about podcasts a lot and I'm obsessed. I got into them a couple years ago when my commute started getting longer and I wanted something other than, music's great, but there's only so many hours of music, at least personally, that I could listen to. And a lot of the times you guys ask me what my favorite podcasts are, and I love talking about podcasts, so I thought we would go through my favorite list of, like I said, non-healthcare podcasts. I do have a video of my 2019 favorite healthcare podcasts I'll leave down below. And if you want to hear about my 2020 favorite podcast, make sure to subscribe so you can catch that video. I'm going to wait selfishly a month or two to put it out because I know of a few more podcasts coming out that I want to check out that I think will probably be included on the list. So we'll wait a month or two for our 2020 healthcare podcast, but there's so many gems in this list that we can dive into today. So I'm just going to read down my phone. So these are not in any particular order. They're just going to go down, I think it's alphabetical. And I do want to say these podcasts are probably not ones that you would want to listen to if you are listening with little ears. I don't listen to these. I actually listen to a lot of these in my headphones while I'm like cooking or doing the dishes or something like that. Not necessarily, it's not that they're like swearing and dropping F-bombs all over the place. It's more of some of the content can be a little bit more mature in some of these. So most of these I would probably recommend, at least listening to the first couple on your own. If you do have kids around, seeing, feeling them out there before deciding if you want to incorporate that into something that they can listen to as well. Also, I listen to my podcast on Overdrive. I get a lot of questions about that. It's a podcast app I switched to years ago after Apple Podcasts lost all of my data and I had to legitimately cry and have a moment over it. I was like, I may have a problem. And two, let's go to something else. This one lets you speed through. So if you listen to a lot of podcasts like I do, I really like Overcast. I know there's a lot of different ones like Stitcher or all those other ones, but it allows you to listen to them a little bit quicker. Anywho, I've really enjoyed that app. So in case you need a new podcast app, if Apple Podcasts has done you wrong, you know where to go. All right, there's a lot of these, like I said, so I am just going to give you the name of them as well as a very, very brief description, and we'll move forward. I thought I had something in my teeth. I don't think I do. Oh, moving on. Number 1, 99% Invisible. I'm actually just going to read off the description from them because they do a much better job than I am. 99% Invisible is a weekly exploration of the processes and power of design and architecture. Actually, that sounds way more boring than it is. It looks at things that you would normally see in everyday life and you wouldn't even pay attention to, and it tells you this crazy story behind them. This one you're just gonna have to trust me on. It's really, really interesting. It makes you see, regular everyday objects in a totally different way, and it's fascinating. This one you could definitely listen to with kids. Next is Bad Decisions by Katie Duke. This one, don't listen to this one with kids, but Katie Duke, essentially, if you don't know who she is, go check her out on Instagram. She is a nurse practitioner. Her podcast, though, isn't really about nurse practitioner things. She more talks about, bad decisions that she has made in her life. She interviews other people who have made bad decisions and talking about what you've learned from them. And it makes you feel like more of a normal person. Like, oh yeah, I am not the only one who made those very unique choices at one point in time. She also goes on some tangents. If you like my tangents, you'll like her tangents. She's kind of snarky and has that sassy attitude. So I really appreciate that one just for making you feel like, oh yeah, I'm a normal person. I make mistakes. Other people make mistakes. We're all going to be just fine. Next, we're moving into, there is a true crime theme throughout some of these. Not total obsession, but it's definitely there. It says Criminal is a podcast about crime. Stories of people who have done wrong, been wronged, or have gotten caught somewhere in the middle. She tells really good stories. A lot of them are from a while ago and have an interesting historical context. The host really likes to go and interview people. It's just a really interesting, not too gory, gritty, anything like that, true crime podcast. And every episode is its own little capsule. It's not like an ongoing thing. Next is Death, Sex, and Money. This is a podcast about the big questions and hard choices that are often left out of polite conversation. Death, sex, and money. They interview different people and talk about mostly just things that, like it says, you wouldn't normally think about being talked about in a podcast. Lots of really interesting guests on. I like podcasts that tell you different stories just to get different perspectives of people and kind of take you out of your own bubble a little. And this one does a really good job at that. Next, Invisibilia. This is one of my favorite podcasts about unseeable forces control human behavior and shape our lives, beliefs, and assumptions redemption, Invisibilia, Latin for invisible things, fuses narrative storytelling with science that will make you see your own life differently. Every season of this show has an overarching topic and then lots of little episodes within it. And they really do, the hosts do a good job of going and diving deep into like psyche type stuff. A lot of science actually behind human emotion and why people do what they do, and really looking deep into that, but in a storytelling way. It's not like a lecture in any way, shape, or form. It's all told through stories. Really fascinating, especially if you like more of scientific things behind why people do things. Next on our storytelling theme is Memory Palace. This is a cool one where the host, Nate DeMeo, kind of just tells random stories about historical times, but in a capsule of like a moment or a memory as someone would remember it, which sounds odd, but if you like history and you like storytelling and you like learning random factoids about pieces of history, this one is going to be for you. Next is Minority Korner. And in this podcast, they say they take an introspective look at the world through a minority lens. So it interviews a lot of people who identify from minority populations and just lets them kind of see the world and their experiences from their lens. That's an especially great one, especially given the times we have right now. They're doing a lot surrounding just, well, I mean, that's what their whole podcast is about, amplifying the voices of the minority, which we need more of. Next is Modern Love. Oh, Modern Love. This is like one of my absolute favorites. Can you tell? Modern Loves just goes and they tell stories. It's about love. It doesn't have to be romantic love. I think they say stories of hope, love, and redemption. Love, loss, and redemption. I was so close. And this one is just a feel good. It's based on a article that goes into the New York Times. People like write in. They have celebrities that read the stories and then they explain why they read the story, and then they interview the person that wrote the article that went into the New York Times. They just made a Netflix series on it, and this is just one that gets you in the feels. Most of the time for a good reason, and some of the times it just makes you cry. Most of the time they're happy though. Next is The Moth. This is great if you like storytelling. So The Moth is literally just a storytelling platform. They have different Moth main stage events where people can come and they tell stories. Most of the episodes are themed, so when you go to these storytelling events, you know, they'll say like, hey, you can come and tell a story about camping or something like that. And usually they're much more like insightful than camping, and all the stories revolve around that. But it's cool because it's regular everyday people that get to go to these events and your name gets picked out of a hat and they kind of help you tell a really good story. So it's not just people standing up there rambling, kind of like I feel like I'm doing now. But again, this goes into my love of podcasts that just kind of tell a story. I love learning things from different people's perspectives, and I don't know, it's just fun and fascinating. Next, this one is one that one of my NP students turned me on to, and I'm so obsessed. My Favorite Murder. This is in the vein of Avery's awake from her nap. Do you hear her knocking? Go back to bed, Avery. Not today, kiddo. This is a podcast where the hosts talk about their favorite murders or crimes that their fans write in and talk to them about. And it's usually is kind of like dark humor. You know, there's some of them are kind of funny or they find the humor in them, but they also illuminate lots of like, I've learned about so many things that I never knew happened. And they just, you know, I feel like there's a whole crime thing going on. It's just interesting to learn about different crazy things that have happened in the world, but they're both very, very funny humans, and I highly recommend. Next, this one's kind of out of left field compared to the rest of this list. Planet Money. This is the economy explained as you would try to explain it to like me, you know what I mean? Like they try to take different economic things, which on the surface doesn't sound interesting at all, but kind of is. Like recently they've been talking about where are we getting all this money that's coming in through, you know, the stimulus packages, where all the small businesses got these loans, and like, where is this money coming from? What on earth is the Fed? They try to explain those things, and it's kind of interesting because I have no idea about any of those things. And they talk about things that are happening in the world now versus things that have happened before. So it's just like, it's one of those things where you just like learning, but they do it in a very fun way. I can't stress that enough. Like every time I tell someone about this, they're immediately like, the economy. But it really is well done. They explain it at a level of me who has zero economic know-how. And I'm not particularly interested in that, but somehow I like this podcast. Anyway, long story short, check it out, see for yourself. Next, this might be my favorite of all time is Radiolab, like the one that I will never miss an episode ever. Very interesting topics. They're all over the place. Very, very well done, well researched, just really fascinating. Like if you just like learning about random stuff, this one's for you. They were one of the first ones I listened to and I just like love them. Next is Unruffled by Janet Lansbury. If you have little kids, this one I really love for like parenting advice. If you're into more of like the respectful parenting, I think is what they call it. I don't know. But she just gives a lot of really good parenting advice for littles. So if you have kids, specifically little ones, and you need like something where you're just like, I don't know what to do here, I've really enjoyed listening to her podcast. She has books too. I have a couple of them. Oh, this is another good one too. Terrible, thanks for asking. This was from a different nurse practitioner student. And this podcast is hosted by, and you're gonna have to just bear with me here because it sounds awful, but it's beautiful. You know how every day someone asks, how are you doing? And even if you're totally dying inside, you just say, fine, so everyone goes about their day. This show is the opposite of that. Hosted by Nora McInerney, this funny, sad, uncomfortable podcast talks honestly about our pain, our awkwardness, our humanness, which is not actually a word. And it does just that. She just talks to people about usually things that are sad, sometimes things that are happy, but it's usually the story is just beautiful, even within sad stories, you know, and it's taught me so much about empathy, honestly, of just looking at different situations and being able to put myself in the mindset of like, I have no idea what other people are going through. I've also been able to really understand on a much deeper level my patients who are going through really hard things, particularly death, dying, chronic disease processes, because they interview a lot of people with chronic disease, who have had loved ones who have died, or people themselves who are going to pass. And it really has given me good insight into that, which as a healthcare provider is helpful because I deal with interacting with people who are going through that a lot. So, and it's just like beautiful. It makes you just want to hug your family and be like, oh, it's a feels one. It gets you in the feels. Now that I'm describing, I'm like, why would anyone listen to that? But that one is like another never miss one. This American Life is next. This one, I bet a lot of you have probably already heard of This American Life. It's a weekly public radio show. This one is similar to Radiolab in that they tell a story on different topics, but they tell 3 different stories within one overarching topic every single episode. So they come at it from different perspectives usually. They interview a lot of people. It's another one that just tells you about an interesting time or place through a story. They cover things like current times. They give you good historical perspective for a lot of different things. That one, it kind of is all over. Another one that it's hard to pin down of like what the topic is because the topic is like anything that sounds interesting, but it's a really good one. Next is, don't worry, there's only 2 more. This Is Love. I told you I have a problem. This isn't even my healthcare ones. This Is Love is a story that investigates life's most persistent mysteries, stories of sacrifice, obsession, and the way that we bet everything on each other. So another one kind of in the vein of Death, Sex, and Money. It talks about, oh, I just realized I missed one. We'll have to go back. Sorry, 3 more. Very similar to the other ones where we've talked about like stories of relationships and people and just love, but not in like a gushy romantic necessarily way. This one's more of an interview-based one where the host is going and like interviewing people as they tell a story. But that's another one that I've listened to forever and have really enjoyed. Now, second to last, StoryCorps. This one is an interesting one because it takes 2 people and they interview each other and you just listen. So sometimes there's a prompt and sometimes it's just 2 people sitting down in like a StoryCorps booth and they just talk. A lot of times it's like a kid and a parent or a kid and a grandparent or 2 siblings, you know, anybody. And it's interesting to see their dynamic. Sometimes they will take people from opposite ends of what you would consider the same planes. So for example, people who are very different politically. They sit them down, give them a few prompts, and people who are obviously like amicable and willing to have like decent conversation, see if they can find common ground. And that's what the whole podcast is kind of about, is just learning that like everyone has a story to share. You probably have something to learn about everyone that you chat with. And most of us can find some common ground where we realize like, oh, we're all humans. We should all be decent to each other. Huh? Cool. And the kid ones are always so cute when they interview like their parents. They have really insightful questions and they're like 6. I'm like, dang. And last, not last in general, but just because it's, you know, we're going alphabetical, is Young House Love has a podcast. You guys know, if you follow me on Instagram, that I love John and Sherry. I feel like a lot of you are like, where'd you hear about that? I'm like, oh, Young House Love. Like, I love Sherry. So this podcast is hosted by this couple who has a blog called Young House Love, which is about like home renovation. But their podcast is more like they update you on some home renovation stuff, but they also just share their favorite like life stuff that they found. They interview random people, kind of like an auditory Instagram feed where they just kind of show you like, hey, this is what we're up to in life. Like, here's what happened to me this week. Oh, my kid did this. Where we went, I found this cool thing. Let me tell you about it. Like, hey, let's play a random game. Like things like that, which again, I'm really bad at describing podcasts. I'm realizing now because all of these I'm like, that sounds lame. You'll just have to try them out and let me know. That concludes my list of podcasts that I am currently loving that are not healthcare related. And you know that if you have some that you love that I need to know about, please leave them down in the comments because I know I have a podcast problem, but I'm always always ready to accept new podcasts into my life. This is actually a weeded down. I weeded some out. I was like, no, they don't need to hear about those because those aren't the best. This is my weeded down list of ones that I usually never really miss an episode of. I hope maybe you found some that you can try to dive into. And don't forget, leave me yours. Also, if you could leave a brief description about what they're about, that way we can all decide like, yeah, that sounds for me, or like, nah. And we'll see if you can do a better job describing the podcast than I did. I think you'll find that it's actually kind of difficult to describe podcasts, or maybe it's just me. Anyway, thanks for being here. I hope you have a delightful time going and exploring some of these podcasts and adding them to your list. Stay tuned for that updated healthcare podcast video, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.